Trust is like a mirror. Once it's broken, you can never look at it the same way again. My name is Margaret Rose Thompson, and at 71 years old, I've learned that the people who hurt you deepest are the ones who know exactly where to aim the knife. I'm sitting in my kitchen writing this, looking out at the garden my mother always dreamed of planting. I've got arthritic hands and silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Most folks see me as just another quiet widow who taught school for 40 years and minds her own business. They'd be wrong about the quiet part. 4 years ago, I did something that shocked everyone in our small town. I took my own sister to court. I had her arrested for fraud. I sent her to prison and destroyed what was left of our family over money, principle, and a truth that needed telling. And sitting here now, watching the sunrise over the land, my parents worked their whole lives to own. I can tell you this, I'd do it all again without a moment's hesitation. But let me tell you how a retired school teacher became the kind of woman who could look her own flesh and blood in the eye and say, "I'll see you in court." Jennifer Rose Thompson, we called her Jenna, was born 3 years before me on a snowy December morning in 1949. Where I came into the world quietly, Jenna announced herself with lusty cries that could be heard clear down the hospital hallway. That pretty much set the tone for our entire childhood. Jenna had our father's auburn hair that caught fire in sunlight, and our mother's green eyes that could sparkle with mischief or flash with determination. She was the kind of child who climbed the highest trees, spoke up to bullies, and never met a dare she wouldn't take. I was the opposite, quiet, bookish, perfectly content to live in her shadow. But here's what everyone needs to understand about Jenna. She wasn't born bad. For most of our childhood, she was my hero, my protector, my best friend, all rolled into one fierce, loyal package. When Tommy Morrison pulled my pigtails on the school bus, Jenna marched right up to him and said, "You touch my sister again, and you'll be eating your lunch through a straw." Tommy never bothered me again. When I was 8 and afraid of the dark walk to our mailbox, Jenna would take my hand every evening and walk with me, making up stories about brave princesses and magical kingdoms until I forgot to be scared. We shared a bedroom until I was 15, matching twin beds with a nightstand between them where we'd pile our shared books. After our parents turned out the lights, we'd whisper across that small space about our dreams, our fears, our plans for when we grew up. Jenna wanted to be a nurse, to help people heal and feel better. It suited her. She was always the one bandaging scraped knees and bringing soup when someone had a cold. I wanted to be a teacher, to help children learn and grow. Even then, we both wanted to make the world a little better, just in different ways. Our parents, Robert and Mary Thompson, raised us with crystal clear values. Work hard, tell the truth, help your neighbors, and always, always take care of family. We went to church every Sunday, said grace before meals, and knew that family came first, no matter what. For 45 years, I believed Jenna shared those values completely. I was wrong. Robert Thompson was a carpenter who built houses for other people while slowly, carefully building his own dream. He worked construction during the day and spent evenings and weekends on our place. 5 acres of rolling countryside he'd bought with a handshake and a promise to pay it off over 15 years. Dad was a man of few words, but incredibly steady hands. He taught us that anything worth having was worth working for, that your word was your bond, and that family was the only wealth that really mattered. He wore the same brown work boots for 20 years, patched and unpatched until they looked more like leather patchwork than shoes. Our mother, Mary, was the absolute heart of our home. She kept house, raised us girls, and stretched every dollar until it cried for mercy. She could make a pot roast, feed 6 people, turn flour and water into the most wonderful bread you ever tasted, and somehow always have a quarter for the church collection plate. Mom believed in proper manners, clean fingernails, and treating everyone with kindness regardless of their station in life. She taught us to write thank you notes, to always offer guests something to drink, and to never, ever speak ill of family in public. The house Dad built wasn't fancy. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen with yellow gingham curtains, and a living room with furniture that lasted for decades because they bought quality and took care of it. But it was solid, warm, and filled with more love than some mansions ever see. They weren't wealthy people, not by any stretch. Dad worked hard, for every dollar, and Mom made those dollars stretch like rubber bands. But they were rich in the ways that mattered most. They had each other, they had us girls, and they had the deep satisfaction of building something lasting with their own hands. By the time Jenna and I grew up and moved away, our parents had paid off the land, owned their home free and clear, and had a modest savings account that represented 40 years of careful living and wise choices. It wasn't much by some standards, but it was theirs, earned honestly and saved carefully. According to their will, written when I was 30 and filed properly with their longtime attorney, it was supposed to be ours equally when they were gone. Adults Jenna and I took different roads but stayed true to our childhood dreams. She became a registered nurse, just as she'd always planned, and was genuinely good at it. Her colleagues respected her skills. Her patients loved her gentle but no-nonsense care. And she quickly moved up to a supervisory position at the regional hospital. She married David Kowalski in 1975, a steady, kind man who sold insurance and shared her love of gardening and quiet evenings at home. They bought a modest house about an hour from our parents' place and settled into what seemed like a happy, stable life. They never had children. Jenna said she took care of enough people at work. But they seemed genuinely content with each other and their peaceful routine. I followed my own dream and became a teacher, spending 40 years in elementary classrooms watching children discover the magic of reading and learning. I married Tom Mitchell in 1978, a wonderful man who coached high school basketball and believed, like me, that every child could succeed with the right encouragement and support. Tom's coaching position took us about 3 hours away from home, which meant I saw our parents less often than I would have liked. I visited during school breaks, holidays, and summer vacations, but the day-to-day care of our aging parents naturally fell more to Jenna. I felt genuinely guilty about that distance, especially as Mom and Dad got older and needed more help with daily tasks. Jenna never complained directly, but I knew she was doing more, stopping by after her work shifts, helping with yard work on weekends, taking them to doctor's appointments, making sure they were eating properly and staying safe in their home. When our parents reached the point where they needed someone to have power of attorney for their medical and financial decisions, Jenna was the obvious and logical choice. She was there. She was capable. She understood their wishes better than anyone, and she had their complete trust and confidence. I signed those power of attorney papers without a second thought, grateful that Jenna was willing to take on such a big responsibility and confident that she would always act in our parents' best interests. That trust, that gratitude, that absolute faith in family loyalty, those feelings would prove to be the foundation of the biggest betrayal of my life. October 15th will be burned into my memory until the day I die. Not because of any anniversary or celebration, but because it was the day my world ended and my education and family betrayal began. I was in my classroom that Tuesday evening, staying late to grade papers and prepare lessons for the next day. It was one of those peaceful autumn evenings when the work felt manageable, and the kids had been particularly sweet. I remember humming, while I worked, thinking about the pot roast waiting at home and the mystery novel I was looking forward to finishing. My phone rang at exactly 6:47 p.m. I almost didn't answer. I was in a good rhythm with my grading. But something made me pick up. Margaret? Jenna's voice was barely recognizable through her tears. Oh God, Margaret, they're gone. They're both gone. The pen fell from my hand. What? What do you mean gone? A truck, she sobbed. It ran a red light. They were coming home. From the grocery store, And this truck they died instantly. Both of them. The world tilted sideways. One moment I was a daughter grading papers in my comfortable classroom, and the next moment I was an orphan trying to understand how my parents could simply cease to exist between one heartbeat and the next. The details came in fragments through Jenna's tears. Mom and Dad had gone to town for groceries, something they did every Tuesday afternoon for 30 years. They were driving through an intersection they'd navigated thousands of times when an 18-wheeler, driven by a man who'd been on the road for 16 straight hours, ran a red light and hit them head-on. They never knew what happened. The impact killed them instantly. That was the only mercy in the whole horrible situation. The next few days passed in a blur of casseroles, flower arrangements, and decisions that felt impossible to make. How do you choose a coffin for your father? How do you decide what dress your mother should wear for eternity? How do you write an obituary that captures a lifetime of love and sacrifice in a few hundred words? Jenna and I leaned on each other through it all, just as we had as children. We cried together, shared memories, and tried to make sense of a world without our parents in it. She handled most of the arrangements. She was there. She knew their wishes. And honestly, I was too shattered to think clearly about practical matters. The funeral was beautiful, if any funeral can be called that. The little Methodist church, where our parents had worshipped for 40 years, was packed wall to wall with friends, neighbors, and people whose lives they had touched in some meaningful way. People shared stories about Dad's generous spirit and Mom's famous apple pie. The pastor spoke about their faith, their love for each other, and their enormous pride in their daughters. Jenna and I sat in the front pew, holding hands tightly, drawing strength from each other as we listened to story after story about the two people who had shaped us, loved us, and left us far too soon. At the cemetery, as we watched those two simple wooden coffins being lowered into the ground, Jenna squeezed my hand and whispered, "We'll take care of everything, just like they would have wanted. We'll honor their memory and their wishes." I believed her with my whole heart. In the weeks immediately following the funeral, when grief felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest, Jenna was my anchor. She handled the immediate paperwork, dealt with the insurance companies, and managed all the overwhelming details that seemed too much for my broken heart to process. "Don't worry about any of that right now," she said when I asked about the estate. "There's no rush on any of it. The important thing is that we take time to grieve properly. We'll deal with all the legal stuff when we're both ready." I was grateful for her strength, her willingness to shoulder the burden while I tried to figure out how to live in a world without my parents. It seemed natural that she would handle things. She'd been handling so much already, and she was more familiar with their financial situation than I was. But weeks turned into months, and when I started asking about the estate, Jenna's responses became vague and oddly dismissive. "I'm working on it," she'd say, sounding tired or distracted. "There's a lot more paperwork involved than I expected. The lawyer is being incredibly slow about everything." "Which lawyer?" I'd ask. "Maybe I can help speed things along, or at least understand what's taking so long." "It's more complicated than I thought it would be," she replied. "I don't want to burden you with all the boring details while you're still processing everything. Just trust me to handle it properly." At first, I accepted these explanations completely. Jenna had always been more organized than me, more comfortable dealing with financial matters and legal documents. If she said things were complicated, they probably were. And honestly, I wasn't eager to dive into the painful process of dividing up our parents' belongings. But as more months passed with no updates, no documents, no progress reports of any kind, I began to feel genuinely uneasy. The few times I pressed for specifics about timelines or next steps, Jenna became irritated. "Why are you being so impatient about this?" she'd snap. "I'm handling everything, aren't I? Just trust me and stop questioning every little detail." The word trust began to stick in my throat. Of course I trusted her. She was my sister. But trust didn't mean I shouldn't be informed about my own inheritance, did it? By the 6-month mark, my unease had grown into genuine concern. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. I decided to do some investigating on my own. I started by calling the county clerk's office to inquire about any property transfers related to our parents' address. What I learned made my blood run cold, and my hands shake so badly I could barely hold the phone. The house had been transferred into Jenna's name 3 months after the funeral. The land had been transferred the same day. When I asked about the will or court order that would have authorized such transfers, I was told that a will had indeed been filed, naming Jenna as the sole beneficiary of all real estate. Sole beneficiary. Not joint beneficiary, not equal shares. Sole. I requested copies of all the documents immediately. When they arrived in the mail 2 days later, I spread them across my kitchen table with hands that shook so violently I could barely manage the paper clips. There was indeed a will, dated just 2 weeks before our parents' death, that left everything to Jenna. Not just the real estate, but everything. The house, the land, the savings accounts, even Mom's jewelry and Dad's tools. But as I stared at those signatures at the bottom of the page, something twisted in my stomach. The handwriting looked like our parents', but it didn't feel right. The signatures were too careful, too deliberate, lacking the natural flow of someone signing their own name. I had boxes of our parents' real handwriting upstairs. 40 years of birthday cards, Christmas notes, grocery lists stuck to the refrigerator, with magnets. I brought down a handful and compared them to the will signatures. The differences were subtle, but unmistakable to someone who'd seen their handwriting thousands of times. The pressure was wrong. The letter formations were slightly off. Most tellingly, there were tiny tremors in the signature lines that suggested someone had been tracing over pencil marks. My sister had forged our parents' will. I called Jenna immediately, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "I just received copies of the will from the county," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one that leaves everything to you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, could almost hear her mind racing. "Oh, that," she said finally, and I could hear her scrambling for the right tone. "I was going to tell you about that change." Change? When did they change their will? And why didn't anyone tell me? "Mom and Dad made some decisions before they died," she said, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "They felt like I'd been doing more to take care of them over the years. They thought it was only fair that I inherit the property." Fair? The word came out louder than I intended. They never mentioned anything about changing their will to me, not once. And fair would have been discussing this with both daughters, don't you think? "You weren't around as much, Margaret. You wouldn't have known how to manage the property anyway. This way is simpler, cleaner, better for everyone." Better for everyone? Or just better for you? "You're being dramatic," she said, and I could hear the calculated coldness creeping into her voice. "Besides, you should be grateful I didn't fight you for Mom's jewelry, too. There are debts you don't even know about." That's when I knew. In that moment, hearing the dismissive tone and the casual cruelty in her voice, I knew that my sister, my protector, my childhood hero, had stolen from me. But more than that, she'd stolen from our parents' memory. She'd dishonored their wishes and betrayed their trust just as surely as she'd betrayed mine. I hired an attorney the next morning. Sarah Mitchell was a sharp, experienced woman in her 50s who specialized in estate litigation and fraud cases. She listened to my story with professional calm. "Family estate fraud is unfortunately more common than most people realize," she said. "We'll need to prove the will was forged." I had boxes and boxes of our parents' genuine handwriting. We hired Dr. James Crawford, a retired FBI document examiner who'd testified in hundreds of fraud cases over his 30-year career. He spent 3 weeks analyzing the will Jenna had submitted against samples of our parents' genuine handwriting. His conclusions were damning and thorough. The signatures on the will were sophisticated forgeries. The forger had clearly studied our parents' handwriting carefully. but several telltale signs gave away the deception. The pressure patterns were inconsistent with natural writing. The letter formations showed hesitation marks typical of someone copying rather than signing naturally. Most convincingly, there were microscopic tremors in the signature lines that indicated tracing over pencil guidelines. But Dr. Crawford found something even more damaging. The notary signature on the will belonged to Patricia Williams, a longtime friend of Jenna's from nursing school. When Sarah tracked down Patricia, she initially claimed she couldn't remember notarizing the document. But under gentle pressure and the threat of perjury charges, Patricia broke down and admitted the truth. "Jenna asked me to do her a favor," Patricia told us, tears streaming down her face. She said her parents had already signed the will, but needed a notary stamp for the legal filing. She said it was just a technicality, that I didn't need to actually witness the signatures since they'd already signed it. I thought I was just helping a friend with paperwork. But it wasn't just paperwork. It was a fraud. Serious, calculated fraud. The discovery process revealed even more disturbing evidence. Bank records showed that Jenna had been systematically transferring money from our parents' accounts into her own for 8 months before their death, buying herself a new car, paying off credit card debt, even making a down payment on a vacation cabin. Armed with Dr. Crawford's expert analysis and Patricia's confession, we took Jenna to court for forgery, fraud, and abuse of power of attorney. The trial lasted 4 days. I sat in that courtroom every morning, watching my sister lie under oath about our parents' final wishes. She looked different somehow. Smaller, desperate, like a stranger. When Dr. Crawford took the stand and presented his findings to the jury, showing them side-by-side comparisons of the forged signatures and our parents' genuine handwriting, I watched Jenna's face crumble. She knew the game was over. The jury deliberated for exactly 1 hour and 43 minutes. Guilty on all counts. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. Jenna was ordered to return my rightful half of the estate plus penalties and interest. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison, though she ultimately served only 10 months. Most devastatingly, the state nursing board revoked her license permanently. Her career was finished forever. As we left the courthouse, Jenna finally looked directly at me. "I'm sorry, Margaret," she said quietly. But the apology felt hollow. Too little. Too late. I moved into our parents' house 8 months after the trial concluded. Using part of the settlement money, I completed renovations that I found sketched out in Dad's workshop, dreams he'd drawn, but never had resources to implement. I added the sunroom where Mom had always wanted to sit and read. I planted the flower garden she'd planned for 40 years. The land itself became my therapy. Working in Mom's garden, maintaining Dad's fruit trees, caring for the acres they'd loved. It felt like the most meaningful way to honor their memory. Tom took early retirement and joined me in this new life. He understood that I needed to be here, needed to be the keeper of our family's true story. People often ask if I feel guilty about what happened to Jenna. The answer is clear. I don't feel guilty at all. I didn't destroy Jenna's life. Her choices destroyed her life. What I feel is profound sadness for the sister I thought I knew, and the family shattered by greed. But I don't regret seeking justice. What I did was expose the truth and ensure our parents' real wishes were honored. That's not revenge, that's love. Love for parents who deserved better than to have their final wishes ignored and their life's work stolen. I haven't spoken to Jenna since sentencing. She served her time, lost her marriage, her career, her family relationships. She moved away, and I don't seek information about her life now. The difference between us is clear. I can sleep peacefully knowing I fought for truth. I live in the house my parents built with honest labor. I tend the land they loved. I carry forward their values: integrity, honesty, genuine care for family. Jenna chose immediate gain over family loyalty and lost everything that really mattered. At 71, I understand that sharing blood doesn't guarantee sharing values. Some of the deepest betrayals come from people who know us best. But I've also learned that real family isn't about genetics. It's about people who love you without keeping score. If you're reading this and recognizing your own situation, know this: you're not alone. Family financial abuse is common. You have options. Seeking justice isn't revenge. It's about truth and accountability. A good name is more desirable than great riches. To be esteemed is better than silver or gold. My parents left me something more valuable than money, a moral compass that points true north even in dark storms. They left me the ability to distinguish right from wrong even when the choice is painful. That's the inheritance Jenna could never steal, no matter how many documents she forged. That's the legacy that really matters. As I sit here watching sunrise over the garden my mother dreamed of, I know I honored their memory in the way that mattered most. Not by staying silent to keep peace, but by fighting for truth, even when that fight was the hardest thing I've ever done. They raised me to be a woman of integrity, and in the end, that's exactly what I became. They would be proud. Some days I miss the sister I thought I knew, but I've never, not for one moment, regretted choosing truth over family peace, justice over comfortable lies, integrity over easy silence. That's what real love looks like sometimes. That's what real family values demand. And that's a lesson worth learning, no matter how much it costs to learn it.